Hey, good afternoon, everybody. We're doing another podcast with Fool Nelson here, Steve McIntyre, the climate auditor, and Dr. Hans Mahncke. And we're doing this because just recently, John Ratcliffe, the DNI, declassified a very intriguing letter. And in that letter, it says that in July 2016, U.S. intel agency obtained insight into Russian intelligence analysis that U.S. presidential candidate Hillary Clinton had approved a campaign plan to stir up a scandal against U.S. presidential campaign candidate Donald Trump by tying him to Putin and the Russian hacking of the DNC. Furthermore, according to handwritten notes, former CIA Director Brennan subsequently briefed President Obama and other senior national security officials on the intelligence, including the alleged approval by Hillary Clinton on July 26, 2016, of a proposal from one of her foreign policy advisors to vilify Donald Trump by stirring up a scandal claiming interference by Russian security services. All right, so this letter is very important because, I mean, this isn't breaking news most likely, but most of us have thought that Hillary Clinton stirred up this Russia hoax scandal through the dossier and to produce this. And what we're going to do in this podcast is, now since we see this July 26, 2016 date that Hillary was trying to vilify Donald Trump, we're going to go through a timeline of all the players, dossier memos released, and basically whereabouts of some of the people involved in the dossier and this potential scandal where the Clinton campaign is trying to blame the DNC hack on the Trump campaign. Now, DNI Ratcliffe has already said that this is not Russian disinformation. This is solid intel. It's not specifically verified, but it was worthy enough to be referred to the FBI. So basically, to start off the timeline, on July 22nd, WikiLeaks released the DNC emails, which sort of led to this Russia hoax. And and then during this 4-day time period, there's certain events that took place, probably starting with Robbie Mook on the 24th, saying some things on live TV. So we're going to go through the timeline, try to figure out if we can prove, because this intel is unverified, but we're going to try to figure out if we can actually prove that Hillary Clinton, the campaign, directed this scandal, probably used by using Steele and the dossier. And we're going to go through all the timeline. And Hans, you want to start it off?
Yeah, sure. You mentioned Mook. I think that was sort of the first seed. So you had the 22nd, July 22nd. That's when the DNC email dump happened. And then 2 days later, 24th, Mook is on CNN, and he throws out this idea that the Russians have done this to help Trump. And obviously, that's the whole narrative that we've seen play out over the past, 4 years. So it's sort of odd that he had this narrative in a very kind of tight packaged way. It's like just a 20-30 second clip where he just comes out with the whole story, the summary of the whole story of the past 4 years, and he had it there on the 24th. So obviously that kind of makes you think, well, where did he come up with that? Was that sort of some sort of plan? I think we've talked about this before. We've obviously tweeted about this idea that Hillary knew she had a liability with these emails. So this idea that she'd have a plan to sort of counter that if and when there was some problem with emails, and it might have been the Russians, it could have been someone else, but just the idea that she had a plan in place, I think that we've talked about that, and I think that's sort of very plausible. So our thinking has been, and I think it's more or less still our thinking, that when the DNC emails dropped, they're obviously not her own emails, the 30,000 yoga emails, but that still triggered the plan to go and blame Trump for it. So that's one way of thinking about it. I guess the other way of thinking about it is that the whole thing was concocted, including the leak itself. In that case, it wouldn't have been a hack; it would have been leak. And so then the plan kind of that was part of the plan as well. We don't know. But what we do know is that there was certainly a plan to deal with this kind of situation. So Mook set that in motion on the 24th. He went on CNN and he basically said, they're doing this because of Trump, they're helping Trump. And then obviously in the following days, a few other things happened, which, piqued our interest. And, maybe I'll just pass it to Steve, because Steve's really looked into this Steele dossier that was drafted around that time. And then, anyway, I'll pass it to you, Steve.
Okay. The key report in the Steele dossier is Report 95, which is undated, but is placed by Horowitz on July 28th, which is 2 days after the date ascribed in the Ratcliffe Letter to the Hillary campaign decision. So to get to that point, I'm going to start back a little bit with Igor Danchenko and Sergei Millian, because the Report 95 is attributed by Steele to have been supplied by the primary subsource and attributed to Sergei Millian. The problem is that at that point, Danchenko had never met Millian, and there's a real question about whether Steele wrote the report himself in his office without reference to information from Danchenko or Millian, who is in Asia. So there's some quite intricate, and there's a lot of information available on the timelines of each of these guys. It takes time to weave it together, but we're starting to see a pretty strong pattern emerge. Let me take it back to how the first report that Steele produced, Report 80, is the P-tape report. That was presented to the DNC in late June, got an enthusiastic reception, and they got instructions to produce more of the same. In early July, Steele instructed Danchenko, who is in the States, to locate sources linked to the Trump team. Now, up to that point, Danchenko's research had mostly been, in effect, spying in Russia for Steele. The instruction to, in effect, spy on Trump sources in the United States was a new assignment for Danchenko, and he expressed to the FBI that he was actually somewhat uncomfortable with this new assignment. But he took it on. He first, according to the FBI interview, he first sought information from Washington-based reporters for a Russian-language newspaper, RIA Novosti. He had lunch with Alexei Bogdanovsky, who's a U.S. citizen and a reporter for Novosti, in mid-July. The date of this can be placed, I think, quite closely to July 20th or 21st. Bogdanovsky had been in Russia between July 2nd and 12th. He'd been at the Republican convention on July 18th. And Igor Danchenko sent Millian an email on July 21st following his lunch with Bogdanovsky. So Igor is meeting this Russian reporter and getting Millian's name on approximately July 20th, just 2 days before WikiLeaks dropped, and within a week of the decision of the Hillary Clinton campaign to target Trump for the WikiLeaks drop. So Danchenko has lunch. Bogdanovsky tells him he should contact Millian, who had been interviewed at RIA Novosti as a Trump supporter earlier in the year. Millian, on July 21st, using the contact information from the Novosti reporter, sends an email to Millian. Millian at that time is in Asia. His placement, his itinerary can be quite closely dated by his Facebook postings at the time. He was in Seoul, Korea on July the 13th and 14th. He was in other Asian cities over the next 2 weeks, ultimately leaving from Dubai on July 27th. So he's out of the country while these events are happening. Danchenko's email to Millian on July 21st, we now have a copy of it. After Danchenko was identified in July of this year, we asked Millian to search his emails for something from Danchenko, and he located 2 emails, one on July 21st and the second one on August the 18th. In the July 21st email, Danchenko introduced himself as a business analyst. He pretended to have an inquiry from a Swiss construction company and claimed to have nothing to do with media. And he asked for a face-to-face meeting in Washington or New York, telling Millian that he would be in New York the following week, firmly expecting Millian to be in New York. Millian didn't respond to the email. The day after, I mean, the timing is amazingly intricate here. On the very day after Danchenko sent the email to Millian, WikiLeaks dropped. So that presumably caused consternation in the Clinton campaign while they were developing their strategies over the next few days. But Millian is off in Asia and doing his own business. On July 26th, on July 25th, Millian was telephoned by ABC. Actually, let me go back one. Millian was identified by Fusion GPS as a person of interest on June 25th by Nellie Orr. On July 5th, Matthew Mahncke of ABC, who works with Brian Ross, who's intimately connected with Fusion GPS, contacted Millian for an interview and asked him whether he would be at the Republican convention in July 18th. Millian said no, he was going to be in Asia. After the WikiLeaks drop, Mahncke contacted Millian on his cell phone overseas, presumably, and they had a short interview, which Brian Ross published in an article the next day. So this is July 26th, when lots is happening on July 26th. Brian Ross publishes the article. Millian sent an email to another Novosti reporter, Dmitry Zlodorev, the reporter who had actually been interviewing him, and saying that he would be returning back on the Friday the 29th, and that he had an email from an Igor. Who is he? Who does he represent? We don't know what Zlodorev's response to Millian was. Millian is attested in Dubai on the morning of the 27th, and he, according to information provided to us, arrived back in New York on the evening of July 27th, late at night. And on 2 days later, Mahncke sent Millian a text asking for an interview for ABC. Millian agreed and was interviewed by Ross on July the 30th. Meanwhile, on July 28th, actually two dates. On July 26th, Steele published the second memo, or actually, let me go back. Sorry to stumble here. On July 19th, Steele published the second memo in a sequence, and this was the memo 94 that had reported the meeting between Carter Page and Sechin in Moscow. This is an interesting email because the Sechin Page meeting almost certainly didn't happen, and so it becomes a tracer for influence of the Steele Dossier in early articles based on leaks. And there's a story that a reporter at the Wall Street Journal was approached on July 26th to run with the Sechin Page story. The other thing that's interesting about this story is that this actually did originate, the false information did originate in Russia of this meeting. It appears to have originated from Danchenko's friend Mila Podobodeva, and where she got the information remains a bit of a mystery. In response to the WikiLeaks drop, Steele seems to have been asked for a report on hacking, and so the first report that they produced was Report 86, which is dated July 26, 2015, presumably a typo for July 26, 2016, and it included fairly garden variety open source information on Russian hacking that was pretty uninteresting and has not caused much commentary from anybody. However, 2 days later, on July 28th, at least that's the date that Horowitz gives to Report 95, Steele gives a document that can be described as nothing other than a fulfillment of every Democrat fantasy about that Mook had talked about. It introduced the phrase a well-developed conspiracy between the Trump campaign and Russia. It said that the campaign was directed by Putin personally because he supposedly hated and feared Hillary Clinton, a phrase that was incorporated into the Intel assessment later that year. It said that the WikiLeaks drop was a devil's bargain between the Trump campaign and Russian intelligence services, in which the Russian intelligence had agreed to hack the DNC and release it through WikiLeaks in exchange for relief on sanctions. It described various implausible chains of communication that implemented this devil's bargain, in which Carter Page was acting as an instrument for Paul Manafort. It's all imaginary. The source for the Report 95 was a Russian-speaking person close to the Trump campaign, breadcrumbs pointing directly towards Sergei Milian, who was later identified by name by Steele. Steele's sort of very quick identification of Milian as a supposed source stands in sharp contrast to his protestations that he had to protect the identities of his sources so that they would not be in harm's way. When it came to Millian, he couldn't identify him fast enough.
Steve,
Millian.
can I just, I don't want to interrupt you, but I think it's such an important point that it really bears kind of, highlighting it. The fact that you had on July 26th a Steele dossier that obviously didn't satisfy Fusion or Hillary or whoever was receiving these things, because as you said, it included just sort of the garden variety stuff about Russian hacking and Russian cyber operations, but no details of any kind. It was just a very bland kind of dossier. And then just 2 days, and I think this is the point that's really worth highlighting. 2 days after, on the 28th, suddenly you get this dossier 95, which has everything in it. There's a conspiracy with Trump, and Putin is helping Trump, and it's all in there. The hack was orchestrated by the Russians to help Trump, and as you said, it's all in there. So I think the timing here and the contrast between those two dossiers, 86 on the 26th of July, and then on the 28th you got 95, is just very strongly indicative of Steele having been given instructions. Hey, look, buddy, we didn't want this garden variety stuff about Russian operations. We want something specific, and then he coughed it up. Sorry to.
I'm glad that. Yeah, I mean, so purpose.
And furthermore, the intelligence points to the directive might have by the Clinton campaign might have went out on the 26th. So it's important to note that on the report 95 came out on the 28th, which is after. And furthermore, that report is undated, which also is sort of suspect why that report is undated. I guess in the Horowitz report, according to Steele, is the 28th, but it might have been in some time period in between there. And then furthermore, the sourcing of which, Steve, I'm going to send it back to you, but the sourcing of 95, it's supposedly Millian, but it's actually from something a little bit more ambiguous, which I'm going to kick it back to you, Steve.
Yeah, it's a lot more ambiguous. We now get into the FBI asked Danchenko about the source for 95, and we know from the Millian's itinerary. Well, let me just review on. Danchenko arrives in New York on July 27th. He traveled. His itinerary can be interestingly determined quite accurately on social media, because we even know that he crossed by ferry from Hoboken, New Jersey to New York, that he took pictures from a ferry traveling along the New York skyline on the 27th, has a picture of the UN building on the 27th. And on the 28th, he's at a children's playground in Manhattan, as it appears that he traveled to New York with his daughter. The reason for he explained the trip to the FBI that subsequent to the July 21st email that he had sent to Millian, that he had received an anonymous phone call that lasted about 10 to 15 minutes with a Russian male, who didn't identify himself. And the Russian male had told him that there had been communications between Trump and the Kremlin, that there was, quote, nothing bad about it, and that Millian said that he agreed tentatively with the anonymous caller, who Danchenko says he believed to be Millian, that he would meet him in New York on the following week. So Now it seems more than strange that that he would then travel up to New York in the hopes of meeting an anonymous caller. I'm not exactly sure how they plan to identify themselves to one another. The FBI seemed remarkably uninquisitive about the where and when they hope to meet, and indeed one wonders whether there ever was such a call. Was the anonymous call just simply invented by Danchenko? I'm inclined to think not, on the basis that Danchenko was under a lot of pressure in his FBI interview, and pretty much and things that can be checked in his interview check out. So it seems an odd thing for me. It seems odd to me that he would have just made up an anonymous call. On the other hand, it doesn't, from the point of view of a chain of custody for evidence, it's not very convincing evidence that the whole Russiagate conspiracy should rest on a 10-minute anonymous call to Danchenko when the person doesn't show up. So at some point on the 27th, Danchenko felt that the anonymous caller was a no-show. Now, exactly where he didn't show or what he was supposed to do is a mystery that the FBI was very uninformative on. So Danchenko then called Zlodorov, who had been a reference to a point of contact with Millian presumably on the 27th, and Zlodorov, who by chance had received an email from Millian in Asia the previous day, said, well, you'll have a hard time reaching Millian because he's in Asia. The precise whereabouts were redacted in the 302, but it's easy to fill in. Danchenko then says that he told Steele where Millian was located. This would probably be on the 28th or 29th, and then Danchenko returned to Washington on the 29th. Steele, we know, was in Washington on the 29th because he had breakfast with Bruce and Nellie Orr, and in the morning of the 29th, and in the afternoon of the 29th, he had a meeting with Perkins Coie, with Michael Sussman there, where he talked about Alpha Bank and was presumably directly briefing Perkins Coie for the DNC on developments. So Steele to be there for breakfast would have been in North America and Washington already on the 28th, and one wonders whether he mightn't have been in North America for a few days earlier. So Steele is in North America on the day that the Report 95 is delivered. And it seems even possible that he may have delivered 95 in person to Perkins Coie and to Fusion GPS. The timing is really is quite intricate.
And Sussman says that he met with Steele with Glenn Simpson and Peter Frisch at that time.
Sorry, beg pardon?
I said Sussman says that Peter Frisch and Glenn Simpson were in the meeting with Steele as well.
Okay.
Just to add more context, I guess.
All of which makes sense.
Right.
The next day, on July 30th, Steele produces another report attributed to Millian, which comments further on the scheme. It slightly walks back it starts talking about Putin having misgivings about the scheme. But at this point, Millian and Danchenko still haven't connected. The conclusive proof that Danchenko and Millian never connected comes in an email on August 18th, 2 weeks later, in which Danchenko sends another email to Millian, which is one that, again, Millian discovered after Danchenko was identified. And in this one, Danchenko tried to pitch a land deal near Moscow as a way of getting into the same room with Millian. And Millian again ignored the email, and he explained to us that Danchenko had very ill-conceived ideas of what Millian's business actually was. Millian said that he had explained to us that he had a real estate license in the U.S., not in Russia, so that a deal in Russia was totally meaningless for him. And Danchenko's idea of what would be bait to a real estate businessman was just totally ill-conceived. It was sort of an academic's idea of business, not an actual business thing. But in the email, Danchenko makes no reference to having met Millian, which he hadn't, or to the anonymous call. So what does this? So what this suggests to me is that, first of all, Danchenko was not the supplier. Well, first of all, Millian himself did not provide any of the information in Report 95 to anyone. Millian's out of the country. He's in Asia. He never talked to Danchenko. I don't think that Danchenko provided that information to Steele either. We're confronted a little bit with the other dude did it. Steele has recently said that he was informed by Danchenko that he had 3 dinners with Millian, and that he got the information from Danchenko, and so Steele is pretending to be just an innocent receiver of Danchenko's information. Danchenko, at most, Danchenko can be said to have transmitted the rather vague information in the one anonymous call, but Steele's dossier requires 4 different calls sort of attributed to sourcing from Millian, which is clearly impossible. And so I'm very skeptical of any of Steele's story about how he got this information. And at most, there was a very thin amount of information from Danchenko based on this supposed anonymous call, but most onto which Steele fabricated everything about WikiLeaks and the Devil's Bargain and the conspiracy. All of that, in my opinion, originates in Steele's office by people that we can speculate about, but we really don't know much about right now. So then Steele is in probably in a rather, he seems to have got somewhat ahead of his skis in terms of framing Millian. Svetlana Lakova has explained quite lucidly how the general modus operandi of people like Halper and Steele is they like to put people in the same room, and then once they're in the same room, they can concoct almost any story that they want. But in this case, Steele has concocted a story in which Millian is the source in a circumstance where Millian can prove that he wasn't in the same room with Danchenko and was not even in the same continent as Danchenko, while Steele has published 4 reports sourced to Millian. So this all seems to be and this isn't that hard to figure out. The FBI should have been able to figure this out with just by looking at the documents. The other thing that really, and I'll sort of finish up my lengthy segment here on this point. James Baker, when talked about how the FBI went about verifying information that where they couldn't verify what happened in a meeting, but they did try to verify the existence of phone calls. So one of the first things that FBI due diligence should have done was to check the telephone records of Danchenko to see whether he did receive a telephone call from a unidentifiable number, or from Millian's number, Millian's cell phone in Asia, or from some other person in Asia where Millian was located as of July 24th or so, 25th, when this anonymous call would have presumably happened. One wonders, what steps did the FBI actually take to verify the existence of the call, and what were the results? I guess the one thing that we can be sure of is that they were unable to verify a call from Millian on that date, if they did it, because if they had, we'd have heard about it. So the silence either means that they didn't do anything or they didn't find a call. Back to you guys.
No, that's
Well, Hans, you can go.
no, that was very detailed, and I mean, I don't really have any to add. I would just sort of pull out a few things just to highlight. So we've got the 2 dossiers that follow each other on the 26th and the 28th, and the 26th is just this broad one about like broad cyber intrusion by Russians, and then the 28th one is the one that blames it on Trump and so on. And then the last part that Steve talked about, that there was another dossier added a few days after that, which is where Steele sort of walks it back a bit. And, you know, if you look at the language, and the one on the 28th, the one that was meant to sort of blame Trump for the DNC hack, has that term we've all heard, you know, the well-developed conspiracy. That term is in there. Now, in the one that follows a bit later, after Steele found out about the problem with Millian, you know, not having been in the same room, so that might be a problem, sort of pinning things on him eventually if people ask questions. As Steve just said, no one ever asked questions. But anyway, he kind of walks it back a bit, because in the next dossier, he only talks about, you know, that there was some cooperation or something like that. So he, you know, that the terminology sort of changes. But you know, I think in terms of not following up on these things, you know, we just learned the other day that they got these national security letters on General Flynn by false pretenses, just making up a totally fraudulent excuse for getting them. And they couldn't even get the phone calls off of, you know, Danchenko or, you know, Millian, and it's just absolutely ridiculous. The other point I would highlight is, I mean, Steve already talked about it, but the reason why we know, or we can be almost certain that Millian is telling the truth and Danchenko and Steele are not, are these emails, because we've seen them, and you know, Millian has very kindly shared them. And if you go somewhere and you're supposed to meet someone and they don't show up, first of all, I mean, you should call them, or if you just have email, why don't you email them and say, hey, buddy, where are you, or whatever. There's nothing like that. But then I think even more importantly, the one that we do know, the subsequent email, the second email between that Danchenko sent to Millian, makes no mention of any meeting, doesn't mention anything about, hey, where were you? Is nothing at all on that in there. It's just sort of a continuation of the first one from about a month earlier. So I think there's a lot of indications there. And obviously Steve's already kind of laid out the case, but I guess those were the things I'd highlight.
Actually, the two things they just remind me of. One, my guess is that Danchenko might have gone up to New York on spec, just hoping to find Millian in his office and confront him there and just get in the same room, however briefly, just invite him to coffee, just to say hello, and then went to see Zlodora, and maybe even went to see Zlodora first to find out where Millian was, or where his office was. It could have been something as simple as that. I can picture going up to New York on spec for an important meeting, even if you didn't have it. It's not that far, but that's more. The other thing is that Millian, as the supposed source E, is supplying all the sort of best information that Steele can provide in the period late July, early August. The Steele memos, but then he drops off. Then after Danchenko's second email to Millian, where he still doesn't get in the same room, that's the last we hear of source E. So why? So if this guy was an actual source, why wouldn't they keep getting information from him through October, when Steele and Danchenko were under considerable pressure to produce more details, to provide things to back it up, whereas what we see in the Steele Dossier reports in October, they become almost totally dependent on information from Olga Galkina, his high school BFF from Perm, Russia, who at that point is in Cyprus having a dispute with her boss in a child custody trouble. So, and those ones it's another day's topic, but I'm wonder whether Danchenko is just making all of those up and putting Olga's name on it as sort of his most trusted friend.
No, I completely agree. Yeah.
Yeah. I just want to reiterate this intelligence that they presumably got from a source or a method from Russia, where the Russian analysts on the 26th say that the Hillary Clinton campaign and her foreign policy advisors basically concocted this idea that Trump and his campaign hacked or were involved in the DNC hack with WikiLeaks. I just want to reiterate without putting forward that this turned into a memo 2 days later that this conspiracy happened. Without these two things together, you could say, oh, I mean, there's no evidence for that. But this is compelling contemporary evidence for that. And furthermore, this is conjecture, but we know that this idea that this source or method could be Oleg Smolenkov, who, according to John Brennan, he got this package of bombshell information in the late summer or whenever it was, and then he briefed Obama on it. In this recent Washington Post article, he says on July 28th he briefed Obama on some of this information. July 28th, obviously, we've been talking about, is a pretty important date, and again, this information, they say it's not Russian disinformation. I'm kicking around in my head. I don't know if this is correct or not. Is Smolenkov the source of this information? And I'm just putting things together on the 28th. Brennan says he briefed this information to Obama on the 28th. Steele is potentially in Washington, D.C. on the 28th. Do you guys have anything to say about that? Because the idea from some people is that Brennan briefed the dossier on the 28th. But also there's this idea that there's this Smolenkov information that he could be briefing on the 28th. But yeah.
The most authoritative person that I know on this topic views Smolenkov as a Brennan false flag.
Yeah.
That Brennan said that he didn't use the dossier, but it's very clear but there's links between Brennan there's an absolute tracer in information that Brennan gave to Harry Reid about the Carter Page section meeting that ties directly to disinformation that's in the Steele dossier. So either Brennan is denied using the Steele dossier, but then he's getting information from a common origin to the Steele dossier. The theory that the Russian expert gave to me was that Smolenkov is a false flag that Brennan cited in order to disguise where his actual sources were. So I wouldn't. My view right now is not to take that seriously and to view it. I mean, you can't exclude the possibility totally, but to sort of stay in the lane that we're in right now.
Yeah, no, I agree with Steve, and I think we just don't know enough about that side of things, but we do know enough about the Steele side of things, and so you got this in a very short space of time, you had Mook putting the idea out there, planting the seed, and then Steele comes up with a dossier that backs all that up, sort of just magically. And I think those two kind of data points are very, very important. And then I think the one that we already talked about, obviously, is the one that kind of reinforces that, which is that Steele had, in fact, given them another dossier after the DNC leak or hack, whatever you want to call it. But it wasn't good enough, so he had to come up with the 95 one 2 days later, which happened to include everything. So I think that's pretty compelling evidence that this was all orchestrated by Hillary. What we're left with then is, was it orchestrated sort of including the actual DNC emails, which we've looked at them, they're pretty inconsequential. That was somehow part of it. Again, we don't know that. We don't know enough about it. I mean, I'm still going to stick with the original idea that Hillary had this plan. It was on the ready just in case any bad emails dropped. And then when they did drop, it wasn't the 30,000, but it was other emails. They activated the plan.
Yep, I agree with that. Hans, I know you got to go soon. Steve, do you have any closing words, or do we have anything else to add?
We should mention Downer, right? We got Downer on the 26th as well. So you had Alexander Downer on the 26th, which is the same day that Obama was briefed about Hillary's plan, walking into the U.S. Embassy in London and giving his tip. So I think it would be great to hear from Downer exactly as to what motivated him, because we know Peter Strzok lied about that, and he had to eventually admit. I don't think he admitted he lied. I think he misremembered or whatever, but he lied in his book about that. So there's a lot of misinformation on exactly what motivated Downer. What Downer says is that when he saw that these DNC emails had dropped, that sort of triggered him, and he thought, hey, wasn't there this Papadopoulos guy who talked about that and walked into the embassy because of that? But mind you, there's 4 days between the drop and him walking into the embassy. That's 4 days of thinking. That's a bit long, isn't it? If it's such a huge deal. My theory on that's always been that it was the Mook thing that triggered Downer, not the DNC itself. Maybe the DNC thing kind of, piqued his interest, but it was the MOOC thing that really triggered him, because the MOOC thing was late at night on the 24th. That would have been on the 25th in London. So when Downer woke up, and he's the ambassador, he probably gets his sort of news reports or whatever. CNN is he's watched all over the world, especially kind of, you might not even get Fox or whatever over there. You might not watch Fox. So it's sort of quite plausible that Downer would have seen Mook saying that, and then that's what really pushed him to think, wow, isn't that what this Papadopoulos guy said? Because there's such a close match between, what Downer says, what Mook said about the Russians helping, and what Papadopoulos supposedly said about the Russians helping. So, we don't know what triggered him. I wouldn't sort of do too much on that right now before we know more. I think I'll still just go with our original theory that he was just triggered independently of Hillary's plan, and it just worked out perfectly for Hillary, of course, because there was suddenly, apart from all the things we already talked about, right, today, there was another data point, another thing thrown in, and hopefully he'll talk about that some more sometime.
Sure. Steve, do you have anything more to add?
No, I think that's a nice chunk today.
Sure. And I guess I'll just summarize it real quickly. So basically, there's intel that says that the Hillary Clinton campaign directed or created this idea that the Trump campaign was involved in the DNC hack and the release through WikiLeaks, which led to which coincidentally or not, if this intel could be correct, which gives evidence that this intel could be correct, is that 2 days later, this report, the Steele Report 95, popped out that basically says the exact thing that this intel 2 days later said, and that the sort of scandalous thing about that report is it's sourced to an anonymous person on a phone call that lasted 10 to 15 minutes to Igor Danchenko, which we don't even know if that happened or not. So that's sort of, what's that?
Yeah, just on that. Well, when you say that at most part of it comes from that, and the rest is but most of it is embellishment.
Right.
Afterwards, so it's either all embellishment or not, at best 90% embellishment. Right.
By Steele, most likely. And then the last thing I'll just say is we don't know. I guess there is this. The intelligence says that Hillary Clinton sort of directed this campaign to vilify Trump by using a scandalous campaign to link him to this DNC hack. We don't know how that information was potentially given to Steele to put out this memo, but that's something that should be investigated.
Yeah.
In my opinion.
Yeah. One comment on the just the significance of this Ratcliffe announcement relative to where we were before. I think just based on the documents that we already had, it was very clear that it's very clear that 95 was very suspicious.
Oh, definitely.
It was just like there's lots of reasons to suspect that 95 was made to order for the Clinton campaign, regardless of Ratcliffe's announcement.
Yep.
Mook's statements on July 24th, I for one have long viewed them as being the first manifestations of the Steele Dossier in leaked information. And we know that Steele Dossier material was being marketed to Wall Street Journal reporter on as early as July 26. So there's lots of reasons to believe that the Hillary Clinton campaign was certainly actively marketing the Steele Dossier information. I guess the one nuance of difference in terms of my understanding of the chronologies would be the relative order of the instruction from the Clinton campaign to focus on tying Trump to Russia, as to whether that came first or whether that came first in the Steele Dossier. So I would view the significance of the Ratcliffe as being pretty strong evidence that the fabrication in Steele Dossier 95 was made to order. That the reason why it fit the Democrat wish list so perfectly was because it was made for them. And it was, and I would assume that any intelligence professional, surely any counterintelligence professional ought to have been dubious about the ability of a intel agent to extract the exact wet dream list of the Democrats in 2 days from the assignment. I mean, it's implausible. In a Le Carre novel, George Smiley would have interpreted that as evidence that he was being fed false information. Everybody at the FBI should have interpreted this as false information from the minute they saw it.
Yep. Anything to add, guys?
Yeah, no, that's exactly right. And I think if we if we close the circle, we can end where we started with Mook, right, on July 24th. So Mook's out there saying, "Oh, the Russians and Trump, and they're helping Trump, and we've heard this, and we've got the intelligence," or words to that effect. So he's laying it out already on the 24th. And then, okay, you might think, oh, well, maybe he heard that from Steele, or maybe there was something there, whatever. The problem with that is that, of course, Steele issued the report on the 26th, which says none of those things. The report that wasn't good enough. So you had to kind of redo it, and then he submitted the one on the 28th. So I think we got a lot of evidence here that ties the Hillary campaign, not only with Steele, but with actually giving Steele specific instructions as to what needs to be in that report. And obviously the one on the 26th just wasn't good enough. And then he came up with the goods. But unfortunately, the one thing that didn't work out for him is he'd have expected, when he sent Danchenko to find Millian, and as Steve said, they only need to be in the same room for 5 or 10 minutes, and then you can make up whatever story in the world you want to make up, as long as you have the two warm bodies in the same room. And that's where it sort of failed, because Danchenko failed on that. He never achieved that. And that's of course a huge problem. And again, more evidence that Steele made up 95, precisely because not personally, but the Hillary campaign wanted it. It was made to order.
Yep. All right, then I completely agree with that. And I'm just going to end it on this. Lindsey Graham. We need the March 2017 interview of Danchenko and the May 2017 interview of Danchenko. If you can get that declassified, that would be fantastic if you're watching.
Okay, we also need the whatever FBI documents have on the anonymous call to Danchenko.
Absolutely, that as well.
Whatever document, any documents on that investigation, if it took place.
Certainly. All right, guys. I guess have a great rest of your afternoon, and we'll have this thing up ASAP.
Okay.
All right, great job. See ya.
Bye, guys.
Bye, everyone.